poor waitress gave her last $10 to a homeless man, unaware he was disguised mafia boss. The poor waitress finished her shift with only $10 to her name, barely enough for her sick brother's medicine. But when she saw the homeless man shivering under the bridge, she pressed the money into his hands anyway, choosing kindness over survival. What she didn't know was that the man she'd shown mercy to was the city's most feared mafia boss, and he'd just decided she belonged to him. The fluorescent lights of Mel's diner buzzed like angry wasps as Mia Chen wiped down the last sticky table, her lower back screaming from another 12-hour shift. The clock on the grease-stained wall read 11:47 p.m., and the autumn rain hammered against the windows like an impatient customer demanding service. "Another glamorous night in paradise," she muttered, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her uniform, a faded pink dress that had seen better decades, clung to her tired frame, and her sneakers had holes that let in the cold Chicago wind. Mia's fingers trembled slightly as she counted the crumpled bills and scattered coins from her apron pocket. $7.38. Then she remembered the businessman from Table 6 who'd left a $10 bill under his coffee cup, with a gentle smile. Her heart lifted for just a moment. $17.38, she whispered. Not even enough for Ethan's medicine. The thought of her 19-year-old brother sent a familiar wave of anxiety through her chest. Ethan had been fighting pneumonia for 2 weeks, and without his antibiotics, his cough had gotten so bad that Mrs. Rodriguez from next door had called twice today, worried about the sounds coming through their paper-thin apartment walls. "You heading out, honey?" called Dolores, the night manager, from behind the counter. The older woman's voice carried genuine concern. She'd been watching Mia struggle for months. "Yeah, just finishing up," Mia forced a smile. "See you tomorrow, Dolores. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. And that brother of yours." The words hit harder than intended. Mia nodded quickly and pushed through the diner's glass door into the biting October night. The wind cut through her thin jacket like a knife, and she pulled it tighter around her shoulders as she started the 6-block walk home to their studio apartment in Chinatown. Chicago's streets were mostly empty except for the occasional taxi splashing through puddles and the distant wail of sirens, the city's constant lullaby. Mia kept her head down, counting her steps and mentally calculating how to stretch $17 until her next paycheck. Maybe she could ask Tony at the corner market to let her pay for the medicine tomorrow. Maybe she could pick up an extra shift somewhere. As she turned onto Wabash Street, she saw him. The homeless man sat hunched under the bridge overpass, just like he had for the past 3 months. Mia had noticed him before, always in the same spot, always alone, wearing layers of tattered clothes that couldn't possibly keep out the cold. His shopping cart held everything he owned, a sleeping bag with more holes than fabric, a few plastic bags, and what looked like books wrapped in newspaper. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, he was shivering so violently that Mia could see it from 20 feet away. She slowed her pace, her sneakers splashing through a puddle as she approached. The man looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. His were dark, almost black, and held a strange intensity that made her breath catch. There was something about his face, weathered and unshaven, yes, but with sharp cheekbones and a strong jawline that suggested he hadn't always lived on the streets. "Excuse me," Mia heard herself saying before she'd consciously decided to speak. "Are you okay?" The man studied her with those unsettling eyes. Up close, she could see that despite his ragged appearance, his teeth were straight and white, and his hands, though dirty, weren't the gnarled, damaged hands she expected from someone living rough. "Cold night," he said simply. His voice was deep, gravelly, but there was something else underneath, an accent, maybe, or just the careful way he spoke, like someone who'd learned to choose his words precisely. Mia's hand went instinctively to her apron pocket, feeling the small bundle of bills and coins. $17.38. Ethan's medicine. Their groceries for the next 2 days. Their bus fare. But this man was shivering so hard his teeth were chattering, and the temperature was supposed to drop below freezing tonight. "When did you last eat?" she asked softly. He tilted his head, as if the question surprised him. It's been a while. Mia looked at him, really looked. His clothes were filthy, but underneath the grime, she could see quality fabric. A wool coat that must have cost hundreds of dollars when it was new. Boots that, despite being scuffed and dirty, were well-made leather. And there was something in his posture, even sitting on the cold concrete, that spoke of confidence, of authority. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was freezing and hungry, and she had $17.38. Without allowing herself to think about it any longer, Mia pulled the $10 bill from her pocket. "Here," she said, pressing it into his cold fingers. "Please. At least get a hot meal tonight. Maybe some coffee to warm up." The man stared down at the money, then up at her face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of the L train and the steady patter of rain. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly, and there was something in his tone, a weight, a significance, that made Mia feel like they were talking about more than just $10. "I'm sure," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. She thought of Ethan, of his worsening cough, of the bills piling up on their kitchen table. But she also thought of her mother, who'd raised them to believe that kindness was never wasted, even when you had nothing left to give. The man's fingers closed around the bill, and he gave her a long, unreadable look that seemed to pierce straight through her. There was something almost dangerous in that gaze, but also something like surprise? Recognition. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mia," she replied automatically, then immediately wondered if she should have lied. Her mother had also taught her to be careful of strangers. He nodded slowly, as if filing the information away somewhere important. "Mia," he repeated, and the way he said it made her name sound different somehow. Significant. "I should go," she said, suddenly feeling like she'd stepped into something much bigger than a simple act of charity. "My brother's waiting for me." The man watched her as she stepped back, rain droplets catching in her hair like diamonds under the streetlight. "Thank you," he said finally, and again, there was that weight in his words, like he was thanking her for more than just money. Mia nodded and turned to leave, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. As she hurried down the street toward home, she felt his eyes on her back, burning into her like a physical touch. She had no idea that in giving away her last $10, she just sealed her fate with one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. And tomorrow, everything would change. Mia's key turned in the lock of their tiny studio apartment, and immediately she knew something was wrong. The lights were all on, casting harsh shadows across their cramped living space, and she could hear the frantic rustle of someone moving quickly through their belongings. "Ethan," she called out, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Her brother appeared from behind the makeshift partition that separated his sleeping area from hers, clutching a worn backpack against his chest. At 19, Ethan was tall and lean like their father had been, but tonight his face was pale with terror, his hands shaking as he stuffed clothes into the bag. "Mia, thank God," he gasped, his voice hoarse from weeks of coughing. "We have to go. Right now." "What are you talking about?" Mia dropped her purse on their second-hand kitchen table, exhaustion making her limbs feel heavy. "Ethan, it's almost midnight." "Go where?" "Away from here." "Anywhere." Ethan's eyes darted toward the window, then back to her face. "I messed up, Mia. I messed up really bad, and now they're coming." "Who's coming? What did you—" The front door exploded inward with a crash that sent splinters of wood flying across the room. Mia screamed and stumbled backward as two men filled the doorway, both massive, both wearing dark suits that couldn't hide the bulge of weapons beneath their jackets. The first man had a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent sneer. The second was bald with arms like tree trunks and cold, gray eyes that swept the apartment like a predator, sizing up prey. Well, the scarred man said, his voice carrying a thick Boston accent. "Look what we got here. The Chin kids, all cozy at home." Ethan pressed himself against the wall, the backpack falling from his trembling fingers. Please, he whispered. I told you I'd get the money. I just need more time. Time, the bald man laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Kid, you've had 3 months. 3 months to pay back what you owe the Vescry family, and what do we get? Excuses. Mia's heart stopped. The Vescry family. Even someone who lived as quietly as she did knew that name. It was whispered in the shadows of Chicago's underworld, spoken with fear and respect. They controlled half the city's illegal gambling, loan sharking, and protection rackets. I don't understand, she said, stepping protectively in front of her brother. Ethan doesn't gamble. He's never. Your baby brother's been playing poker in the back room of Torino's for 6 months, Scarface said, advancing into the room. Started small, worked his way up to the big games. Problem is, he kept losing. That's not true, Mia said, but even as the words left her mouth, she saw the guilt written across Ethan's face. Ethan, tell them it's not true. I was going to win it back, Ethan said miserably. I had a system. I just needed one good hand too. The bald man moved faster than Mia would have thought possible for someone his size. One moment Ethan was standing behind her. The next he was slammed against the wall with a forearm pressed against his throat, his feet dangling 6 inches off the ground. No! Mia lunged forward, grabbing the man's massive arm. Please don't hurt him. Scarface caught her wrist and twisted it just hard enough to make her gasp. Sit down, sweetheart. The adults are talking. How much? Mia demanded, ignoring the pain shooting up her arm. How much does he owe? 50,000, the bald man said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. Plus interest. Plus the VIG for being 3 months late. We're looking at about 75 grand now. The number hit Mia like a physical blow. $75,000. She made maybe $18,000 a year at the diner. Even if she never spent a penny on food, rent, or medicine, it would take her 4 years to earn that much money. We don't have it, she said desperately. But we can work something out. I'll get a second job, a third job. I'll pay you back every cent, I swear. Scarface laughed. Honey, this ain't about money anymore. Your brother cost us a lot more than 75 grand when he opened his mouth to the wrong people. I didn't mean to. Ethan choked out, the bald man's arm still pressed against his windpipe. I was drunk and they were asking questions about the games and I thought. You thought wrong, the bald man snarled. You gave up information about our operations to people who had no business knowing it. That kind of mistake doesn't get fixed with cash. Mia felt the room spinning around her. This was about more than gambling debts. This was about betrayal, about secrets, about the kind of mistakes that got people killed. Please, she begged, dropping to her knees in front of Scarface. He's just a kid. He's all the family I have left. I'll do anything, work for you, whatever you want. Just please don't hurt him. The two men exchanged a look that made Mia's blood run cold. She could see them making calculations, weighing options, deciding her brother's fate with the casual indifference of butchers choosing cuts of meat. That's when a new voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding, and utterly terrifying in its quiet authority. Enough. All 3 of them froze. The voice had come from the doorway, and when Mia turned to look, her world tilted on its axis. The homeless man from the bridge stood in her apartment, but he was transformed. Gone were the tattered clothes and desperate demeanor. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Mia made in 6 months. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing the sharp, aristocratic features she'd glimpsed beneath the grime. Even his posture was different, straight, confident, radiating the kind of power that made grown men step aside. The 2 enforcers immediately released their holds on Ethan and Mia, stepping back with their heads bowed in deference. Boss, Scarface whispered, and there was genuine fear in his voice. We didn't know you were. Clearly, the man said, stepping into the apartment with the fluid grace of a predator. His dark eyes, the same eyes that had studied Mia so intently an hour ago, swept the room, taking in every detail.
Tommy, Sal.
Leave us. But boss, the kid.
Now.
The word was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The two men exchanged nervous glances before hurrying past their boss and out the door, leaving Mia alone with her brother and the most dangerous man in Chicago. Marco Vescari. The man she'd given her last $10 to was Marco Vescari. And now she was completely at his mercy. The silence in the small apartment was deafening. Mia remained frozen on her knees, staring up at the man who had somehow transformed from a homeless vagrant into what was clearly one of the most powerful figures in Chicago's underworld. Her mind struggled to process the impossible reality standing before her. Marco Vescari moved with deliberate slowness, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the worn linoleum as he approached her. Up close, cleaned up and in his true element, he was devastatingly handsome in a dangerous way, all sharp angles and controlled power, like a perfectly crafted weapon. "You can get up," he said quietly, and though his tone was gentle, it carried an undertone of command that made Mia's legs move before her brain could catch up. She stood shakily, acutely aware of how she must look, tired, underdressed, still wearing her stained diner uniform while facing a man whose suit probably cost more than her annual rent. Ethan cowered against the wall behind her, his breathing ragged from both fear and his lingering illness. Marco studied her face with those penetrating dark eyes, and a slow smile played at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't entirely pleasant. There was too much predator in it for comfort, but there was also something like genuine amusement. "Interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Very interesting." "I don't understand," Mia whispered, finding her voice at last. You were homeless. You were hungry and cold, and... Was I?" Marco tilted his head, considering her words. "Or was I exactly where I needed to be, when I needed to be there?" The implication hit her like a physical blow. "You were testing me." "Not initially," he admitted, straightening his tie with the casual precision of a man accustomed to power. "I was conducting business in that area, observing, shall we say, when the weather took a turn for the worse. I decided to wait it out and see what the night might bring." He stepped closer, close enough that Mia could smell his cologne, expensive, sophisticated, nothing like the unwashed scent she'd expected from the man under the bridge. "What I didn't expect," Marco continued, "was for a broke waitress to give me her last $10. No questions asked. No conditions. No expectation of reward or recognition." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "That doesn't happen in my world, Mia. Ever. I couldn't leave you there to freeze," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "No," he agreed, studying her like she was a fascinating specimen. "You couldn't. Despite having every reason to walk away, despite needing that money desperately for your brother's medicine, you stopped. You cared about a stranger." Mia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You knew about the medicine?" "I know a lot of things." Marco glanced toward Ethan, who was still pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. "I know your brother has been coughing for 2 weeks. I know you work 60-hour weeks at that diner and still can't make ends meet. I know you've been skipping meals so he can eat." "How could you possibly?" "Because I make it my business to know things, especially about people who interest me." Marco's attention returned to her, and the intensity of his gaze made her feel exposed, vulnerable. "And you, Mia Chen, interest me very much." Before she could respond, Marco called out toward the door. "Tommy, Sal, get back in here." The two enforcers appeared instantly, as if they'd been waiting just outside. They looked nervous, uncertain, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual turn of events. "Boss." "Scarface," Tommy ventured carefully. Marco didn't take his eyes off Mia as he spoke. "The kid's debt. It's forgiven." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Tommy and Sal exchanged shocked glances, their confusion evident. "Sir?" Sal, the bald man, cleared his throat. "Did you say forgiven?" "You heard me correctly." Marco's voice carried quiet authority that brooked no argument. "Ethan Chen no longer owes the Vescari family anything. The debt is settled, effective immediately. But boss, Tommy protested carefully. He talked. He gave information, too. I know what he did. Marco's tone could have frozen blood. And I'm telling you that his debt is paid. Because his sister settled it before she even knew it existed. Mia felt the world spinning around her. I don't understand. How did I? You gave me everything you had, expecting nothing in return, Marco said, finally turning to face her fully. In my world, that kind of loyalty, that kind of selfless generosity, is worth more than money. Your kindness bought your brother's life. The enforcers looked like they wanted to protest further, but one glance at their boss's expression silenced them. They stood rigid, clearly struggling to process this unprecedented show of mercy. But sir, Sal tried again, the others will ask questions. They'll want to know why. Let them ask. Marco's smile was sharp as a blade. Tell them Marco Vescari honors debts of the heart as much as debts of money. Tell them that kindness, real kindness, is the rarest currency in our business. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Mia. Your brother is free to go, free to live his life. The Vescari family will not trouble him again. Relief flooded through Mia so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Ethan was safe. Somehow, impossibly, her little brother was going to live. But even as gratitude overwhelmed her, she sensed there was more. The way Marco looked at her, the way he'd spoken about debts and loyalty, suggested this wasn't simply charity. There's a catch, isn't there? She said quietly. Marco's smile widened, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. Very perceptive. Yes, there's a catch. The enforcers shifted uncomfortably, sensing their boss was about to make a decision that would change everything. Your brother's debt is forgiven, Marco said, his voice soft but carrying absolute finality. But yours, Mia, yours is just beginning. The words sent a chill down her spine, even as she felt a strange flutter of something that might have been anticipation. What do you mean? She whispered. Marco straightened his cufflinks with practiced ease, every movement precise and controlled. It means that as of tonight, you belong to me. Not in the way you're thinking, I'm not a monster. But your kindness has created a bond between us, one that can't be easily broken. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I have need of someone I can trust absolutely. Someone whose loyalty isn't bought with money or motivated by fear. Someone who would give their last dollar to a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs. And if I refuse? Then you refuse, Marco said simply. Your brother remains free either way. But I think you're too smart to walk away from this opportunity. What opportunity? The chance to never worry about money again. The chance to protect the people you love with real power instead of just good intentions. The chance to see what happens when kindness meets strength. He moved toward the door, his men falling into step behind him. I'll give you 24 hours to decide, Marco said without looking back. After that, I'll assume you've chosen to remain a waitress struggling to survive. And I'll respect that choice. The apartment fell silent again as they left, but the air still hummed with the energy Marco Vescari brought with him everywhere he went. Mia sank into their one kitchen chair, her mind reeling. In the span of 2 hours, she'd gone from giving away her last $10 to being claimed by Chicago's most dangerous man. And the terrifying part was that some small, hidden part of her was intrigued by what he'd offered. Mia stared at the closed door for a full minute after Marco and his men left, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Ethan slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, his face buried in his hands. Mia, he whispered, his voice muffled and thick with shame. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could win the money back, I thought. Not now, Ethan. Mia's voice was sharper than she intended, but she couldn't handle his guilt on top of everything else swirling in her head. Just, not now. She walked to their small window and pulled back the thin curtain, peering down at the street below. A black sedan sat at the curb, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cold night air. Even from 3 floors up, she could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. They were being watched. A soft knock at the door made both siblings freeze. It was different from the aggressive pounding that had announced the enforcers. This was almost polite, controlled. "Mia," Marco's voice carried through the thin wood. "I'd like a word. Alone." Ethan started to protest, but Mia held up her hand to silence him. There was no point in refusing. Marco Vescari wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer, and they both knew it. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, somehow looking even more imposing in the narrow, dimly lit space. His men were nowhere to be seen. "Where are they?" she asked. "Waiting in the car. This conversation is between us." He glanced past her to where Ethan sat hunched on the floor. "Send your brother out for a walk. It's almost 1 in the morning, and he's sick. There's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks south. He can get coffee and stay warm." Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip thick with bills. He peeled off several 20s and held them out to her. "My treat." Mia stared at the money, more cash than she'd seen in months, but didn't take it. "Why?" "Because what I have to say to you isn't for his ears." Marco's dark eyes studied her face. "Because there are things he's better off not knowing. And because despite his mistakes, he's still just a kid who's been through enough tonight." The consideration in his voice surprised her. She'd expected cold calculation, not this strange mixture of authority and unexpected kindness. "Ethan," she called without turning around. "Get your coat." "But Mia." "Go to Murphy's diner. Get something warm to eat and drink. Stay there until I call you." Her brother struggled to his feet, shooting nervous glances between Mia and Marco. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" The question would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. What could a 19-year-old college dropout do to protect her from Marco Vescari? But the fact that he wanted to try made her chest tighten with affection. "I'll be fine," she lied smoothly. "Go." Ethan grabbed his jacket and the money Marco offered, still looking reluctant. As he passed the older man in the doorway, Marco spoke quietly. "Kid," Ethan stopped, his shoulders tense. "You get a second chance because of her. Don't waste it." "Yes, sir," Ethan whispered, and hurried down the hallway toward the stairs. Marco stepped into the apartment and closed the door behind him, the sound final and ominous. Suddenly the small space felt even more cramped, his presence filling every corner. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "I'll stand." Marco's smile was thin but not entirely unpleasant. "You're nervous." "I'm terrified," Mia corrected. "There's a difference." "Good. Terror keeps you alive in my world." He moved to lean against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. "But you don't need to be afraid of me. Not unless you give me reason to be." "What do you want from me?" The question came out more forcefully than she'd intended, but Marco didn't seem offended. "I told you. I need someone I can trust. You barely know me." "I know enough." His eyes never left her face. "I know you'd rather starve than steal. I know you'd give your last dollar to help a stranger. I know you'd throw yourself in front of a bullet for your brother. Those things don't qualify me to work for a crime boss." Marco's laugh was low and genuinely amused. "You'd be surprised how rare those qualities are in my line of work. Most people who work for me do it for money, power, or because they're too scared to refuse. Their loyalty lasts exactly as long as those incentives." He pushed off from the counter and moved closer, not quite invading her personal space, but close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "But you, Mia? You gave me kindness when you had every reason to walk away. That tells me you make decisions based on something deeper than self-interest. In my business, that's invaluable." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Tomorrow night, I have a meeting with some business associates. It's a delicate situation, one that requires careful handling." Marco's voice took on a harder edge. "I need someone by my side who isn't part of the usual power structure. Someone unexpected. Someone they'll underestimate. A waitress. A woman who looks innocent but has steel in her spine," he corrected. "Someone who can observe, listen, and watch my back without anyone realizing that's what she's doing." Mia felt her heart rate spike. "You want me to spy on people?" I want you to be my eyes and ears in a room full of wolves. Marco's expression grew serious. These aren't good men, Mia. They'd kill me without hesitation if they thought they could get away with it. But they won't expect me to bring someone like you. And if something goes wrong, if they figure out what I'm doing, then you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine. The possessive undertone in his words sent a shiver down her spine that wasn't entirely unpleasant, and that fact terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. I can't, she said, stepping back. I'm not cut out for this. I waitress tables and go to community college part-time. I don't know anything about your world. Marco's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Your brother lives because I chose mercy over justice tonight. Don't make me regret that decision. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mia could suddenly see past the expensive suit and careful manners to the dangerous man underneath, the one who commanded fear and respect throughout Chicago's underworld. Are you threatening him? I'm reminding you that mercy, once given, can be withdrawn. Marco's voice was soft, conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. Your brother betrayed my organization. The traditional penalty for that is death. I spared him because of your kindness, but that protection is contingent on your cooperation. Mia felt trapped, caught between her brother's safety and her own fear. One night, Marco confirmed, his expression softening slightly. Stand by my side tomorrow evening, help me navigate this meeting, and afterward we'll discuss more permanent arrangements. And if I refuse, then you refuse, and you'll never see me again. But neither will your brother see another sunrise. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Mia closed her eyes, thinking of Ethan's grateful smile when she'd brought him soup earlier, of the way he'd tried to protect her despite being terrified himself. One night, she whispered. One night, Marco agreed, and his smile returned, warmer now, almost proud. I'll pick you up at 7 tomorrow evening. Wear something elegant. I'll provide it if necessary. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Mia? Yes. You won't regret this. I take care of the people who are loyal to me. And with that promise or threat, he was gone, leaving Mia alone with the echoes of the choice that would change her life forever. At exactly 7 p.m. the next evening, Mia stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress Marco had sent over that afternoon was a masterpiece of understated elegance, midnight blue silk that hugged her curves without being inappropriate, with a hemline that hit just below her knees. The accompanying shoes were Italian leather, probably worth more than her monthly rent, and fit perfectly despite her never having given anyone her size. The fact that Marco knew her measurements should have been disturbing. Instead, it was just another reminder of how thoroughly he'd researched her life. A soft knock at the door made her heart race. Ethan, who'd returned from the diner that morning subdued and guilt-ridden, looked up from his textbook with worried eyes. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I could disappear. Leave Chicago. He'd never find me. Mia smoothed down the silk dress and checked her reflection one last time. Yes, he would. And then we'd both be dead instead of just in debt to him. She opened the door to find Marco waiting in the hallway, and her breath caught in her throat. If she'd thought he was intimidating in his business suit, he was absolutely devastating in formal wear. The black tuxedo was clearly custom-tailored, fitting his broad shoulders and lean frame like it had been painted on. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and a thin white scar along his jaw, one she hadn't noticed before, only added to his dangerous appeal. Beautiful, he said simply, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. Though I expected nothing less. Heat rose in Mia's cheeks. Thank you. For the dress, I mean. It's the most expensive thing I've ever worn. It suits you, Marco offered his arm with old-world courtesy. Shall we? The ride to their destination was silent, the partition between them and the driver firmly closed. Mia stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, trying to calm her racing heart while Marco made quiet phone calls in what sounded like Italian. When they finally stopped, Mia found herself looking up at the imposing facade of the Blackstone Hotel, one of the city's most exclusive establishments. Uniformed valets opened their doors, and Marco guided her through the marble lobby with his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Remember," he murmured as they approached a private elevator, "you're observing tonight. Watch faces, listen to conversations, but don't volunteer information. And whatever happens, stay close to me." The elevator carried them to the penthouse level, opening onto a lavishly appointed private dining room that screamed old money and older power. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany paneling and priceless artwork, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. But it was the men in the room that made Mia's blood run cold. There were perhaps a dozen of them, all in expensive suits, all carrying themselves with the particular brand of confidence that came from knowing they could have someone killed with a phone call. Conversations died as Marco entered with Mia on his arm, and she felt the weight of their collective stare like a physical thing. Well, drawled a voice from across the room. "Marco Vescari brings a date to family business."
How?
"Domestic." The speaker was a man in his 60s with silver hair and cold blue eyes that reminded Mia unpleasantly of a shark. His suit was even more expensive than Marco's, and the deference shown by the other men marked him as someone important. "Castellano," Marco replied smoothly, his grip on Mia's arm tightening almost imperceptibly. "Always a pleasure." Indeed, Castellano's gaze raked over Mia with obvious disdain. "Though I must say, I'm surprised you'd bring outside company to a meeting of this nature." The insult was subtle, but unmistakable. Mia felt every eye in the room on her, measuring, judging, finding her wanting. These men saw her as exactly what she was, a working-class girl who didn't belong in their world of power and violence. "Mia is under my protection," Marco said, his voice carrying a warning that made several men shift uncomfortably. "Your protection," Castellano mused, circling them like a predator. "How fascinating. Tell me, my dear, what exactly do you do for Mr. Vescari? I assume it's specialized work." The implication was clear, and Mia felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger. Around the room, she caught smirks and knowing looks from men who clearly thought Marco had brought his latest conquest to show off. "I'm a waitress," Mia said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I serve coffee and take orders from people who think they're more important than they actually are." The room went dead silent. Castellano's eyebrows shot up, and she could feel Marco's surprise in the sudden stillness of his body beside her. "Excuse me?" Castellano's voice was dangerously quiet. Mia lifted her chin, meeting his cold stare directly. "You heard me. I spend my days dealing with entitled customers who think buying a cup of coffee gives them the right to treat service workers like dirt. So believe me, Mr. Castellano, I recognize the type." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then someone, she couldn't see who, let out a low whistle of appreciation. Castellano's face had gone an interesting shade of purple, and his hand twitched toward what was undoubtedly a concealed weapon. "You little piece of trash," he snarled, taking a step toward her. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "Someone who's used to people being afraid of him," Mia replied coolly, though her heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Someone who mistakes fear for respect and thinks money makes him untouchable. In other words, exactly like the worst customers at my diner, just with better suits." The room erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some appreciative, some clearly anticipating violence. But Marco's reaction was what surprised Mia most. She felt rather than saw his smile, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips that somehow made him look even more lethal. His arms snaked around her waist, pulling her closer to his side in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Gentlemen," Marco said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "I'd like you to meet Mia Chin. As you can see, she doesn't intimidate easily." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "You're full of surprises." The warmth in his voice, The approval she heard there sent an unexpected thrill through her. For the first time since entering this dangerous world, Mia felt like she might actually survive it. Castellano was still glaring at her with murderous intent, but Marco's claim on her was unmistakable. To attack her now would be to attack him directly, and even Castellano wasn't quite ready for that level of war. "Shall we eat?" Marco suggested pleasantly, as if nothing had happened. "I'm sure you're all eager to discuss business." As he guided her toward the dining table, his hand warm and steady on her back, Mia realized she'd just passed some kind of test. The dangerous thing was, she wasn't entirely sure she minded. The business dinner had stretched past midnight, filled with tense negotiations and barely concealed threats disguised as polite conversation. Mia had watched it all with growing fascination and horror, beginning to understand the intricate web of power, loyalty, and violence that Marco navigated daily. Castellano had continued to shoot her venomous looks throughout the evening, but the other men had gradually warmed to her presence, or at least learned to respect Marco's obvious protection of her. She'd even caught a few of them smiling when she'd made quietly cutting remarks about the pretentious service and overpriced wine. Now, as they prepared to leave, Marco helped her into her coat with the same careful attention he'd shown all evening. His hand lingered on her shoulder, and she could feel the tension radiating from his body. "Something's wrong," she murmured as they waited for the elevator. Marco's dark eyes swept the hallway, noting every detail. "You're learning to read the signs. That's good. It might keep you alive." The elevator ride down was silent, but Mia could see Marco's reflection in the polished steel doors. His expression had changed completely from the smooth, controlled mask he'd worn upstairs. Now he looked like exactly what he was, a predator preparing for a fight. "Sir?" The driver, a thick-set man named Vincent, turned as they approached the car. "We've got movement in the parking garage. At least 6 vehicles that weren't there when we arrived." Marco's jaw tightened. How many men? Hard to say, but they're not trying very hard to stay hidden. "Castellano," Marco said quietly, more to himself than to them. The arrogant bastard couldn't wait. Mia felt ice form in her stomach. "What's happening?" "What's happening," Marco said, pulling out his phone and rapidly texting, "is that you just got your first real lesson in what my world is actually like." Before she could ask what he meant, the night exploded into chaos. The first gunshot echoed through the parking garage like thunder, followed immediately by the distinctive crack of automatic weapons. Car windows erupted in showers of glass, and the concrete walls sparked where bullets struck stone. "Down!" Marco shouted, grabbing Mia and pulling her behind their armored sedan as Vincent and 2 other men who'd appeared from nowhere formed a protective semicircle around them. More shots rang out, closer now, and Mia could hear men shouting orders in the darkness. The smell of gunpowder and gasoline filled the air, and she pressed herself against the cold metal of the car, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. "How many?" Marco called to Vincent, his voice calm despite the bullets flying overhead. "At least 15, maybe 20. They've got us pinned from 3 sides." Marco cursed in Italian, his hand never leaving Mia's shoulder. She looked up at him and was struck by the complete transformation she saw. Gone was any pretense of civility or restraint. This was Marco Vescari at his most elemental, a apex predator backed into a corner. "Vincent, take Rodriguez and circle left. Tommy should be coming up from the street level with reinforcements." Marco's orders were crisp, decisive. "I want Castellano alive if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks." Another volley of gunfire erupted, and one of their attackers got close enough that Mia could see his face in the muzzle flash, young, desperate, and terrified. Vincent dropped him with a single, precise shot. "Stay behind me," Marco said, his lips close to her ear. His voice was different now, harder, carrying an edge that made her shiver. "No matter what happens, you stay behind me. I'll get you out alive, even if it kills me." The promise hit her with unexpected force. He meant it. She could hear the absolute certainty in his voice. This man, This dangerous, powerful man was willing to die to protect her. Marco. No arguments. He checked his weapon, a sleek black pistol that had appeared in his hand as if by magic. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to move. When I do, you follow exactly in my footsteps. Understand? Before she could answer, the sound of screeching tires announced the arrival of Marco's reinforcements. The garage erupted into a full-scale war zone as his men poured in from 2 entrances, trapping their attackers in a deadly crossfire. What happened next burned itself into Mia's memory with crystal clarity. Marco moved like liquid death, flowing from cover to cover with the fluid precision of someone who'd been fighting for his life since he was old enough to hold a gun. Every shot he fired found its target. Every decision was instant and lethal. She watched him kill 3 men in as many seconds, his face a mask of cold concentration. This wasn't the charming, controlled man who'd bought her dinner. This was the reason grown men whispered his name in fear, a killer so skilled, so ruthlessly efficient, that even hardened criminals crossed themselves when they spoke of him. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. When the gunfire finally stopped, the parking garage looked like a war zone. Bodies lay scattered across the concrete, pools of blood reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. The smell of cordite and death hung heavy in the air. Marco stood in the center of it all, his tuxedo torn and blood-stained, but his stance perfectly steady. In his hand, Castellano knelt with a gun pressed to his temple, his expensive suit ruined, and his face a mask of terror and rage. "You made a mistake tonight, old man," Marco said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of standing in a field of corpses. "You brought a war to my doorstep and put someone under my protection in danger." "Marco, please," Castellano gasped, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "It was business, nothing personal." "It became personal the moment you threatened what's mine." The gunshot was sudden and final. Castellano crumpled to the ground, and Marco calmly holstered his weapon. When he turned back to Mia, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before, a question, almost vulnerable. He was waiting to see if she would look at him with horror, with disgust, with a fear that most people couldn't hide after seeing what he was truly capable of. Instead, Mia stepped forward and took his blood-stained hand in hers. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. Marco's smile was slow and genuinely surprised.
"No."
"Are you?" "I'm fine," and surprisingly she was. Shaken, certainly, but not broken. "Is it over?" "For tonight," Marco squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "But now you understand what you've gotten yourself into. What I am." Mia looked around at the carnage, then back at his face. "I understand that you kept your promise. You protected me. Even though I'm a killer?" "Even though you're dangerous," she corrected. "There's a difference." Marco stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Let's go home," he said quietly. And as they walked through the wreckage of his enemies, Mia realized that somewhere between the gunfire and the blood, home had stopped meaning her tiny apartment. Now it meant wherever Marco Vescari was. The ride back to Mia's apartment was quiet, the weight of what had happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. Marco sat beside her in the back of the bulletproof sedan, his damaged tuxedo jacket draped over her shoulders against the late-night chill. His men had already begun cleaning up the garage, making the bodies and evidence disappear with the efficient precision of long practice. Mia stared out the window at the passing streetlights, trying to process everything she'd witnessed. The violence had been shocking, yes, but what disturbed her more was how quickly she'd adapted to it. When Marco had asked if she was afraid of what he was, she'd told the truth she wasn't. And that realization was perhaps more frightening than anything else. "There's something you need to know," Marco said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench with dread. "What?" Instead of answering, Marco leaned forward and spoke to Vincent. "Stop at the warehouse on Pier 19 before we go home." 20 minutes later, They pulled up to a nondescript building near the lake. Marco helped her out of the car, his hand steady and warm on her arm as he guided her through a side entrance into what looked like an abandoned office space. But it wasn't abandoned. In the center of the room, tied to a metal chair, sat a man Mia didn't recognize. He was young, maybe 25, with sandy brown hair and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't swollen and bloody. Two of Marco's men stood guard nearby, their expressions coldly professional. "Who is he?" Mia asked, though she had a sinking feeling she didn't want to know the answer. "One of Castellano's men. We found him trying to escape during the firefight." Marco's voice was emotionless, but Mia could see the tension in his shoulders. "Tell her what you told me, Danny." The young man, Danny, looked up with defiant eyes that quickly crumbled when they met Marco's cold stare. Blood trickled from a split lip, and his breathing was labored. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled. Marco nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and backhanded Danny across the face with casual brutality. The sound echoed through the empty space like a gunshot. "Try again," Marco said pleasantly. Danny spat blood and glared at Mia. "Your precious little brother," he sneered. "The one you're so worried about protecting. He's the reason we knew where to find you tonight." Mia felt the world tilt on its axis. "What?" "3 weeks ago, the kid came crawling to us, begging for help. Said he owed Vescary money and was desperate to get out from under it." Danny's laugh was bitter and ugly. "We told him we might be able to help if he could give us information about Marco's operations." "No," Mia whispered, shaking her head. "Ethan wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" "Betray his sister's new boyfriend to save his own skin." Danny's eyes were cruel as they fixed on her face. "He told us about the meeting tonight. The location, the time, who would be there. He even mentioned that Marco would be bringing you along." The room spun around Mia as the implications hit her. Ethan had set them up. Her little brother, the one she'd sacrificed everything to protect, had sold information to Marco's enemies. He'd known she would be there when they attacked. "He didn't know they were planning to kill you," Danny continued, seemingly enjoying her devastation. "Kid thought they just wanted to rough Marco up, maybe steal some money. He had no idea they were planning to turn that garage into a slaughterhouse." Mia's legs gave out, and she sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling. Everything made sense now. Ethan's nervous behavior over the past few weeks, his desperate attempts to talk her out of going with Marco tonight, the guilt she'd seen written across his face. "The funny thing is," Danny went on, "we were going to kill him afterward anyway. Loose ends and all that. Your brother's stupidity saved his life as much as yours." "Enough," Marco said quietly, but his voice carried enough menace to make Danny immediately fall silent. Mia looked up at Marco, through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You're going to kill him, aren't you? You're going to kill Ethan." Marco studied her face for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that somehow made her cry harder. "I should," he said simply. "By every rule of my world, by every code I live by, your brother should already be dead. What he did tonight could have gotten us both killed. But—" Marco moved closer, crouching down so they were at eye level. With surprising tenderness, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. "But he's your brother," Marco said softly. "And I've seen what you'll sacrifice for the people you love. That loyalty, that fierce protection, it's one of the things that drew me to you." Mia stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Ethan gets one chance. One opportunity to prove he's worthy of the protection you've given him." Marco's expression hardened slightly. "But if he ever, and I mean ever, puts you in danger again, I'll end him myself. Sister or no sister." The relief that flooded through Mia was so intense it left her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Marco, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said, standing and straightening his blood-stained shirt. "Because now your brother owes me more than money. He owes me a life debt, yours. And I intend to collect on that in ways he won't enjoy." Marco turned to his men. "Take Danny to the pier." Make sure he understands that if word of tonight's conversation reaches anyone, his family will pay the price. As his men dragged the captive away, Marco offered Mia his hand.
Come.
It's time to go home and have a conversation with your brother. Mia took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, her mind still reeling from everything she'd learned. In the span of one night, she discovered that the man she'd shown kindness to was a mafia boss, that he was willing to kill for her, and that her own brother had betrayed them both. But perhaps most shocking of all was the realization that Marco Vescari, killer, criminal, one of the most feared men in Chicago, had chosen mercy over vengeance because he understood what family meant to her. As they walked back to the car, Mia found herself wondering who the real monster was, the man who'd ordered executions to protect her, or the brother who'd been willing to let her die to save himself. The answer scared her more than she wanted to admit. The apartment looked smaller somehow when they returned, as if the events of the night had changed not just Mia, but the very space around her. Ethan sat hunched at their small kitchen table, his textbooks spread before him in a pretense of studying, but his eyes were red-rimmed and sleepless. He looked up when they entered, and Mia saw the exact moment he registered the blood on Marco's shirt, the torn fabric of his expensive tuxedo. Mia. Ethan started to rise, relief flooding his features. Thank God you're. Sit down. Marco's voice cut through the air like a blade, all warmth gone. We need to talk. Ethan's face went white as he sank back into his chair. His eyes darted between his sister and the man who controlled his fate, and Mia could see him trying to calculate what Marco knew, what he could deny, what lies might still save him. I know what you did, Marco said simply, removing his ruined jacket and rolling up his sleeves with deliberate precision. 3 weeks ago, you made contact with the Castellano family. You gave them information about my business operations in exchange for a promise they'd clear your gambling debt. I didn't, Ethan began, but Marco's raised hand silenced him. Don't. The single word carried enough menace to make Ethan physically recoil. Don't insult my intelligence, and don't dishonor your sister by lying in front of her. She's sacrificed enough for you already. Mia watched her brother's face crumble as the weight of his betrayal settled over the room. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were observing the scene from outside her own body. This boy, because that's all he was really, just a frightened boy, had been willing to let her walk into an ambush to save himself. I thought they just wanted to rough you up, Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face. I swear, Mia, I never thought they'd actually try to kill you. They said it was just business, that they wanted to send a message. And you believed them? Marco's voice held genuine curiosity, as if he were studying a particularly interesting specimen. You thought men like Castellano would stop at sending a message? Ethan's shoulders shook with silent sobs. I was scared. The debt kept growing, and they said they'd hurt you, Mia. They said they'd make you pay for what I owed. So, instead, you decided to let them kill me. Mia's voice was steady, almost clinical. You chose your fear over my life.
No.
It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Marco moved with fluid grace to stand behind Ethan's chair, his hands resting lightly on the young man's shoulders. It looked almost paternal, if you ignored the very real threat in the gesture. Here's what's going to happen, Marco said conversationally. Your gambling debt is officially forgiven. You'll never see another card table, another dice game, another sports book for the rest of your life. If you so much as buy a lottery ticket, I'll know about it. Ethan nodded frantically, hope flickering in his eyes. But your real debt, the one you owe for putting your sister in danger, that can never be forgiven. Only earned back. Marco's grip tightened slightly on Ethan's shoulders. You'll finish school. You'll get a legitimate job. You'll become the man your sister believes you can be. And every day for the rest of your life, you'll remember that you're alive because she loved you more than you deserved. I will, Ethan choked out. I swear I will. Marco stepped back, dismissing Ethan with the casual indifference reserved for forgiven but not forgotten enemies. Go to your room. Your sister and I need to talk. Ethan scrambled to his feet, shooting Mia a look filled with gratitude and shame in equal measure. As he disappeared behind their makeshift partition, Marco turned his full attention to her. And then there were two, he murmured, his voice taking on the intimate warmth she'd heard glimpses of throughout the night. Mia looked around their tiny apartment, at the second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the life she'd built from nothing but determination and hope. It seemed like someone else's existence now, as foreign as a half-remembered dream. "I can't go back," she said quietly. "Can I? To waitressing and worrying about rent and pretending tonight never happened." "No," Marco agreed, moving closer. "You can't. You've seen too much, learned too much." And more importantly, he reached out and took her hands in his thumbs brushing across her knuckles. "I won't let you." "What does that mean?" Marco's smile was slow, dangerous, and completely genuine. "It means you gave me kindness when I deserved nothing. You showed me loyalty when you had no reason to trust me. You stood by my side in a room full of wolves and held your own." He lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "It means you'll never face this world alone, Mia. Not the violence, not the danger, not the choices that will have to be made. I'll protect you, provide for you, stand between you and anyone who would harm you. And in return, you give me what you've already given me. Your honesty, your courage, your heart." Marco's dark eyes searched her face. "Can you do that? Can you choose this life, knowing what it means?" Mia thought about the $10 she'd pressed into his hand less than 24 hours ago. Such a small gesture, such an insignificant amount of money. But it had set in motion a chain of events that had revealed truths about her brother, about herself, about the kind of life that was possible when kindness met power. "I already have chosen," she said softly. "I chose the moment I decided to trust you." Marco's smile transformed his entire face, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been in a different world, a different life. He leaned down and kissed her, soft, reverent, full of promises that had nothing to do with money or debt and everything to do with the strange alchemy that had occurred between a broke waitress and a mafia boss. When they broke apart, Marco gestured toward the door.
"Come."
"Let me show you your new life." As they walked toward the exit, Mia glanced back to see Ethan watching from behind the partition, his face a mask of sorrow and understanding. He knew, as she knew, that nothing would ever be the same. The sister who'd sacrificed everything for him was leaving, transformed into something powerful and dangerous and beautiful. Marco's hand was warm and steady on her back as he guided her toward the car, toward a future that would be built not on desperation but on choice. Behind them, Ethan remained in the shadows of their old life, a reminder of who she'd been before $10 changed everything. But ahead lay Marco Vescari's world, dangerous and dark, yes, but also filled with a kind of power she'd never imagined. And at the center of it all was a man who'd seen her kindness and claimed it as his own, who'd offered her protection and partnership in return for her heart. As the car pulled away from the curb, Mia didn't look back. She was done being afraid, done being powerless, done settling for less than she deserved. She'd given her last $10 to a stranger, and in return, she'd found a love that would reshape the very foundations of Chicago's underworld. Some investments, she thought with a smile, paid dividends beyond measure.